Good morning, world. This is Steve Rao, the host of World Edition on Pod TV, formerly IBM TV. And on Pod TV, we bring you great news from around the world, talk about innovations, and discuss what we can do to build back better and stronger from the COVID pandemic. Today, my monologue is based on one of the most important days in the history of the United States and the world, which we celebrated and remembered yesterday. There wasn't much talk about it, but June 6, 1944, D-Day. On this day, the greatest generation, which was an acronym dubbed by Tom Brokaw, famous journalist, stormed the beaches of Normandy to win World War II. 4,300 Allied personnel lost their lives serving their country in what would be the largest amphibious invasion ever launched. As I've said time and time again, we don't need to see Captain America Steve Rogers in the Marvel's Avengers to know that the real heroes of our nation and world have existed from the beginning of time. These are the American soldiers, and in this case, the greatest generation. On a personal note, one of the reasons D-Day and World War II means so much to me is my grandfather was Major S.V. Rao. He served in World War II alongside the Allies fighting the Japanese in Burma, both as the British Army and then after partition, the Indian Army. I visited Normandy in 2019 and was so moved to visit the beaches of Normandy. On the tour, I heard from the guides of young 18-year-olds getting into the water and being shot immediately, not even able to see the fire in front of them. Their bodies dismembered, swimming in the ocean. Men seeing their own comrades die right in front of their eyes at such a young age. As I saw the graves and I heard the raising of the flags, I welled up in emotion. I visited Normandy and I actually saw veterans go to the graves of those they served with. And one veteran who I spoke to told me that he looked at the grave and realized that he had life that his best friend he lost in the war did not. I believe the best way we can honor those who died in this war, the Great War, the World War II, is to never take our freedom for granted. We must always respect our differences and never cease our commitment to equality and justice for all Americans. For you see, I believe we call this generation the greatest generation, not only because they answered the call and put their own lives in line for our freedom, but also for those who survived, what they did to build America and the world to greatness. It is something to imagine. At the end of the day, I do believe, as I close out this monologue, that we must remember also any fallen soldier in our nation, and in this case, our World War II soldiers, not only by how they died, but how they lived. Selfless, courageous, with conviction and determination. And in the short time they had in this world, they knew that the impact they were making was long-lasting. They are, in my words, an everlasting reminder of the United States being the land of the free and the home of the brave, but also for all of those brave souls around the world. May they rest in peace. May God bless what they have done for all of us. And my word to you is we will never, never forget you, and you are and always will be the greatest generation. I'm now joined with Mark Lee, my co-host. Mark is coming. I think Mark is coming. Thank you, Mark. Well, that was my D-Day monologue, Mark. Mark, you're muted.
I heard the D-Day monologue, and we've got another buddy of ours with us here as well. That being none other than Brandon Scott. So I'm going to see what Brandon's got going on as well.
Yeah.
Hello, good morning. How is everyone?
Hey, good morning, guys. I'm changing scenery because it's hot downstairs. I need my fan, but I had to do the monologue in front of the nicer screen. Sorry. How are you, everybody?
Good. Glad to be here on a bright and early on a Monday.
Yes, absolutely. It's always so great to see Brandon Scott, and you know, I gave a little monologue on World War II, the Greatest Generation. I thought we could talk a little bit about that today, and then I'm going to save my monologue on the G7 summit for tomorrow. President Biden is on his way to England with Vice President Biden. I mean, with Jill Biden, the First Lady, and his team, and we're going to talk about the to-do list that our president has. It's quite exhaustive, but he's a busy man at the sprightly age of 78. Um, I got tired this morning, and I actually thought of Joe Biden going, "How could you be the president at 78?" I mean, if I live that long, I'm going to be on a hammock somewhere reading a book, not leading the nation. But but anyway, real quickly, so guys, what do you think about D-Day? I got to tell you, I want to spend a few moments talking about it because like yesterday, D-Day fell on a Sunday, and we didn't hear a lot about it. Right, there wasn't much talk about it, not a lot of ceremonies. But I listened to a podcast from Tom Brokaw, and he's the one who came up with the word "greatest generation," and he became very moved when he started talking to many of the surviving veterans of the war and began to realize himself all the things they had gone through. But what was really touching was the fact that they lost so many friends at such a young age. They saw someone die and in front of their eyes, some of them. And it's almost like the movie Saving Private Ryan. So I'm going to start with Brandon and then go to Mark. Why do you think, just looking at history, why this was such an important war for us to remember?
Well, I think every, first of all, I have to say, Memorial Day was recently, and I think that we have to also remember the bravery of people who have, who have stepped up and have laid everything on the line for us. I do think that, in human history, every few hundred years, there is the greatest war, the war to end all wars.
Right.
And World War I was that, and it was called that for a long time until World War II happened. And I think in World War II, technology caught up to a point where we were able to do as horrible of things as anyone could ever have imagined, right? From nuclear warfare to the Holocaust, to all these really, just unimaginably horrible things. And I think there was a moment in culture and society around the world, because everyone was involved in this conflict in some capacity, where we all kind of collectively, I think, took a breath and realized science fiction and horror films and fantasy movies, everything had caught up to reality. We were able to do more damage with this war than any war we'd ever fought before. And I think that's when people started to coin those terms like the Greatest Generation. It really truly was the world war where I think governments and cultures had to take a step back and realize that this maybe wasn't the way to go forward. This was no longer a sustainable method of even warfare, and in some of those situations, right? Look at the wars we had after that, right? We had the Cold War, where we both knew each side had such weapons that it was not useful to have land invasions and these incredible feats of personal bravery, because a computer could do that for us, because a machine could do that for us, a drone could do that for us in modern times. So I think it was one of the last wars in modern society that involved so many different cultures and so many different peoples, that we'll see for such a long time, that I think that that's why it resonates with us. And it still resonates today. You have, even Captain America and Marvel movies today is fighting Nazis. So
yeah, I know. And I made that kind of expression, but I think this whole notion that we feel safe when we see heroes that have to step up, like Brandon said. And like the point that Brokaw made is that um, you know, he saw that many of them we survived the war and went on to build the greatness of America. When you look at it, we became the industrial strength of the world. The Allies merged together. Then you had the Cold War, but how we withstood so much, and the United States made it. At the same time, here we are with our own, set of challenges. Racial division, insurrection on the Capitol, division the likes we've never seen, where the only way you can pass a bill through the U.S. Congress or Senate is through reconciliation, which is ridiculous, and
Well, I
reconciliation.
think I want to bring Mark in here a little bit too, because I think this
Yeah,
is an
sorry, Mark.
interesting. I think they're tied together very much so, and this would be why I would say I identify as such a leftist, because it was that generation of people who came back to the United States realizing the value of teamwork and created a lot of unions and pushed in the union sector for better pay. Right? It was that group of people who came back realizing the power we have as a collective force. And I think that we see people who are still afraid of that today, right? Even in some of the racial challenges we've had in this country, people who are afraid of the idea of a group of people coming together, and with the Black Lives Matter movement, we've really seen that when a group of people come together, they can accomplish great things. And I think those are all things that were really seated strongly in that generation, that coming together in community were important. So I'm surprised that some of the people from that generation have such a hard time recognizing that in communities that are different than their own. So I guess my question to you, Mark, is, do you see any parallels there? I'm talking about the sense of community, the sense of people coming together and organizing to accomplish a task. Obviously there have been movements in place that have done great things in the country since then.
I think one parallel would be, and I've actually got to get ready to make a phone call very shortly, so I'm going to leave it to the two of you for a second. But one of the parallels that I would say is that definitely with the war and the Great War, that was one of those things where we were thinking that it would make great, massive changes to the society and all of that. And definitely it did in a lot of ways. And definitely if you look at civil rights and things along that line, that was also something that was supposed to make great changes. And I would argue Black Lives Matter and a number of other movements are supposed to be doing the same thing. But unfortunately, even though we want that change to happen rapidly, oftentimes it doesn't. And I think that we have this kind of parallel where oftentimes every generation has something that is supposed to be that great change and all of that. And I definitely wish that we would have more of those great changes, but we don't always have it the way that we would like. So like I said, it takes time, and definitely, we've gone from an agricultural kind of society to a informational society, and definitely we're in the technology kind of society now. So, every generation has something that changes it, and we're just trying to move it along and see what we can do.
Yes, I think you're right, and I know, Mark, you got to go. Please come back, and we're waiting
I
for
will.
other guests. But as we move on to other issues, I think also when you think about, Brandon, you brought up a really good point. During the and I'm a little bit more, maybe not as progressive as you, but I'm pretty close. We hear this argument all the time about, particularly Reagan and then the rise of Trumpism, that government is the problem, government is not the solution. But when you think about it, think about how much got done in the United States in the 1950s after World War II. 1,000 airports were modernized or created. We provided electricity with the Rural Electrification Act. We did so many great things. We were spending 3% of our GDP on research and development. And really, the United States of America was really able to distance themselves. Also, like the George Washington Bridge was done in 4 years. The infrastructure, and back that time, you had Harold Ickes, who was the chief administrator for all of the public works projects for President Roosevelt. The New Deal really worked.
We went to the moon faster than should have been possible at the time.
Yes. So these were investments. These were investments. Now, I agree, you don't want inefficient government. But this whole notion that federal governments are wasted bureaucrats not doing anything, the fact of the matter is nothing got done in this country without the work and the ethic of the federal government. Now, these guys executed. Now, there has been some analogies between Biden and Franklin Roosevelt. Now, the difference is President Roosevelt had more of a Democratic Congress and Senate, whereas Biden doesn't have that, right? But there are similarities in terms of electric vehicles, infrastructure, broadband, families, the trillions of dollars of investments. And I got to tell you, and I'm going to go on a limb here, But I am very, very proud of President Joe Biden
I
because I
have to
think
say, as a voting Democrat, I'm proud, but with my breath held a little bit. You mentioned Reagan, and I think the thing we have to remember about the Reagan era, and I think the thing that we miss so often in politics is, people talk about the size of the government, the scale of the government, and what the government should be doing. And I think we need to focus more on who's actually in charge, who's running the government. Because even in the Reagan era, when you could say we had some really interesting, for a lot of people, fantastic gains, we had hundreds of thousands of gay people dying in the streets because it was a gay cancer, AIDS at the time, and the Reagan administration refused to do anything about it and acted in the worst interest of that epidemic that we had in this country. And I think the comparison you make is really interesting between Roosevelt and Biden, because I mean, Roosevelt obviously came in right. I think about Hoover and the songs, the pop culture songs and the jazz standards that still exist today about the terrible shanty towns that were Hoovervilles, that people had to live in at the time. And so I think we have to draw a parallel between the state of the country and the actual leader. We're coming out of the coronavirus pandemic, hopefully, if people continue to get their vaccines. And we have a leader now who is over delivering on all of those promises, right? He's missed just about every other promise it seems he's made during the campaign, but he's over delivering on that promise. We've got more vaccines rolling out than promised. We've got more and more people getting vaccinated than was expected at a faster rate. And so I think naturally you're going to see society rebound. Just like you did in the Roaring 20s. I mean, people want to go out and they want to do things and they want to spend their money. And the economy, I don't think we have to worry as much about, because I think people are going to want to really. They're not interested in saving their money and being financially responsible at this time. They're interested in going and experiencing life and traveling and going to bars and going to shows and going out and doing things. That's what people want to do. So I think you are going to see that parallel happen pretty accurately for how you drew it in history. Now, the other point I kind of wanted to address of what you said, I think, we have done wonderful, big, great things, but we haven't always bothered to include people in the things we do.
yeah,
And I think the challenge I always have with the American system is that it's the American system for those who works, for those for whom it works. So going to the moon, great feat. Building these great feats of engineering, wonderful thing to do. But we still had a lot of problem with othering, right? We had women not allowed in the workforce for such a long time. We had minorities not allowed to vote for such a long time. So I think the
yeah,
concern shouldn't so much be which party is in power, because parties change over time. But the concern should be that people should have an equal vote and be able to have a say in who is in power. And I think that's the hot topic, or should be. It's not sexy at all. I mean, we're on a TV show, and it's the least sexy topic to talk about the census and redistricting, and to talk about gerrymandering, voter ID laws that are passing left, right, and center in this country. Texas just is passed one of the most suppressive, voter laws in this country. I think we have to really step back and think about who actually has a say in these great things we're doing. Are we not doing great things because we have bad leaders, or do we have bad leaders because we're not allowing people to actually elect their leaders? It's the least sexy thing to talk about on TV news, right? No one wants to pull up a map of Morrisville, North Carolina, and look at the districting and figure out what is happening in the redrawing of that district. You don't see it on national news because
well,
it's
I
not
mean,
a sexy topic.
yeah, exactly. We'll wrap up our thing about World War II, but I mean, we definitely want to thank any of the World War II veterans that are out there. And if you have a family or loved one that you lost in the war or through early illness, but we pray for you and we are grateful for the greatest generation. I'm going to do more reading this summer. I'm taking vacation next week for a few days, and I'll be definitely reading about the greatest generation. But that's a great segue into these other issues that we're having, right? Let's start with gerrymandering, but I want to get back to race relations and systemic bias, because these are really big issues, and I think that they need to be really taken with really a really hard, serious look. But in terms of gerrymandering, and I can tell you as someone that's in elective office, not the General Assembly, but I think it's it's very important for people to understand that in a true democracy, it should be the voters who decide who they vote for, not the politicians. And what's happened in America, for those of you watching around the world, is that parties will win. The reason it's a big deal for political parties to take over legislatures is that they then will control and draw the congressional Senate maps and the legislative maps. And they can draw them in such a way where they can keep the majority. Okay. So if you look at North Carolina, for example, in North Carolina, our state, the Democrats are winning the urban, more populated areas, but the Republicans are able to control the majority because they gerrymander it in such a way, putting Democrats within Democrats against each other, and then it's just crazy. And so I think we need to have independent districting commissions, which is what one of the legislators in North Carolina wants, where it would be done where they would do that, right? And so that the elections would be objective, because I can tell you, I ran unopposed the last two elections, and when you run unopposed, there's a sense of, well, I'm going to take an early vacation. I'm checked out. I don't think that's good. I think you should be forced to talk to earn the votes, right? The second thing I will say is the money, and I want to throw a number at you guys, which is amazing. In 2002, the Federal Elections Commissions reported that in the United States, $1.3 billion was spent on federal elections. You know what that number is in 2020?
No, what is it?
14.5 billion.
Wow.
So we have increased federal spending in the United States by 13 billion. Okay. Now I'm going to go to Sasha Starr. Sasha, we were talking about World War II, the greatest generation, but we pivoted into kind of the issues we're dealing with in America today. But I'm curious from a Canadian perspective. So what I was explaining to everybody is gerrymandering is when in the United States, the party in power controls the state legislature, and then they decide who draws the districts. How is it done in Canada when you elect your politicians? I mean, is it just, I know you guys go on a ballot, but how do they decide who votes for who? How does that work?
It's very simple. For example, okay, I live in Ontario. So Ontario has all kind of small districts, areas. For example, I live in area Thornhill, just north of Toronto. So we know when the voting will be. We get the ballots, and we just check whether whoever we want to elect, and that's the end of story. I don't see it.
I think what we're the key point here. I don't want to pivot at all the conversation, but I think one of the things we always have to talk about when we talk about the way the American population elects its leaders is the Electoral College being a great example of representation within representation. So when we talk about gerrymandering or what states have what power, we have to remember, I think, that the Electoral College was founded. I'm going to get hate mail for this. I see. I put my website up there, and then I get angry tweets and emails sometimes from things I say on this show. But the Electoral College was founded on a racist tradition. It was founded because at the time, slaves counted as 3/5 of a person, so your census count went up. And if it went up, that meant you had more voting power in the presidential elections. And that's still today, I think, why we're so hesitant to go to one person, one vote. Now, in Canada, if I understand this correctly, having the kind of current voting setup you have, it is pretty much a one person, one vote scenario. You do have representatives that vote on your behalf, but they're obligated to vote with how your district votes, is my understanding.
Yeah, I mean, our district, for example, will elect, let's say we have three major parties. So one of these people will be unlikely NDP, which New Democratic Party, they don't get a lot of votes, but progressive conservatives and liberals, yeah, they will basically split the vote, and whoever gets more vote get at least in that district, and then in next district, and so on and on until all. But okay, there are provincial elections as well. So, for example, it could be liberals in power, like our Trudeau guy. But we have also provincial elections. We have now a progressive conservative who is in power in Ontario. So, but you see, I think Canadian system is not as complicated and sophisticated as US. Um, I think the Canadian politics is they don't influence the daily life of Canadians perhaps as much as in US, much less money going into politics compared to what Steve you just mentioned, this astronomical figures. There is nothing like that in Canada. I mean, they need some kind of budget to produce campaign, but it's probably 100 times less than in US.
Yeah.
Probably.
Hey, Brandon and Steve, I was wondering, I was actually having this conversation with some friends of mine. We were actually talking about, of all things, reparations and things along that line in the African American community. But one of the things that came up in the conversation was the talk of universal voting. So I was wondering what my fellow panelists here thought about that idea and whether they thought it was something that we should even be moving toward, this idea of universal voting and like maybe even one day voting where we all vote on the same day.
Actually, with compensation system, this is a very simple solution. I think there have to be a special tax, say maybe 1,000 a year. That's not a lot of money. 1,000 a year levy on all white people, and that money will go into compensation fund to whatever oppressed nations or people or whoever they are, and that will solve all the problems. What do you think?
Well, I think that's a terrible idea. But I mean, as far as the voting question goes, I think that I mean, we also have to remember our voting day is specifically not on a weekend.
Right.
It's specifically on a weekday because those who can't afford to take off work then can't go vote, which is why some parties in charge are so gung-ho about limiting early voting or voting by mail, because if the folks who can't afford to take off work to go vote don't get to vote at all, then they won't have power. So when it comes to universal voting, I mean, like, heck, Australia has a great system. If Shaq were here, he'd tell us all about it. You have to vote or you can get fined. You know, there are some countries like that.
No, it's not like that in Canada.
And I think in Canada, I think when we talk about universal voting, I think a system of allowing people to vote in the most sensible way makes sense. So if that means early voting, maybe vote by mail. Maybe we don't trust computers yet. We want to do it all by paper. Fine. We want to do it all by paper by mail. That's fine. But giving people the ability to vote, regardless of whether or not they have a driver's license or a social security card or birth certificate, can they stand in line for 10 hours on a weekday to vote? I think all those things are obstacles we should eliminate to allow American citizens to vote. Voter purging is a big thing we have, and actually a lot of laws have been passed here in the last month and a half to purge voter rolls so that people will show up to the polls and not realize they can't vote anymore. I think all these things inhibit what should be the kind of basic right of an American. And I think Canada has solved a lot of those problems. They don't have mandatory voting, but they do make it easy to vote. You show up, cast your ballot, you're done.
Actually, in many cases, it's right. For example, an apartment building, they have a voting booth right there, so you don't have to drive anywhere or go. You just go downstairs and
cast your ballot.
And that's it. Yeah.
And that's it. And we don't have that in the States because that means that the Republican poll watchers, who now have more power in some states, wouldn't be able to supervise all those locations. And live stream from all those locations like they did in the 2020 elections about what they saw as fraud.
Now, do you need an ID? The other question I have is that, we have passed in some certain states, it's on the ballot, it's been passed North Carolina, voter identification. Do you need voter ID in Canada?
Yes, we do.
You need a voter identification. Okay. Now,
it's a personal vote. If you send by mail, then of course you don't provide, but you will get the ballot by mail. So you're replying basically with your sign whom you are voting for. But in person, well, okay, if it's in my apartment building, then I can just show my key for the apartment. That will be probably good enough. But they never really look at my ID. But you have to have it with you. when you get elected.
But their IDs are also acceptable in a lot of different scenarios. For example, where I used to live for so long in Texas, very recently they passed a law outlawing a lot of different forms of ID. So if you don't have a driver's license, an election identification certificate issued by DPS, a personal identification card issued by DPS, a handgun license, a military ID, or a passport, you can't vote. Now, I know people who can't drive, who've never left the country, and who don't own a handgun. But if you show up to vote and you got your original copy of your birth certificate, doesn't matter. They turn
But wait
you
a moment,
in.
when I get a ballot by mail, I'm taking this ballot with me and I'm voting with this ballot. In this case, I actually don't need ID because they know that I have a ballot which was sent to me by mail. Most likely it might even have my name on it. I just don't remember. It does or it doesn't. I really don't remember. It may have probably my name on the ballot already. So I don't know. The voting is the easiest thing of anything, whatever Canadians can do during the day or at night. It's just to vote.
And Sasha's also accidentally discovered why Republicans are so interested in eliminating voting by mail, because you don't have to present that. You can have an address and maybe your driver's license number. You don't have to actually have the physical card. So that's, I think, why we see the interest in eliminating voting by mail or causing suspicion in it.
Yeah, well, speaking of things that are suspicious, we've also got these vaccination cards, and I know a lot of people are wondering if these vaccination cards are actually going to be effective in telling us who's been vaccinated or not vaccinated. Because I've even heard some people speculating that we might get some, counterfeit cards and all of that. And of course, we're also seeing people that are getting benefits, like they're getting some sort of cash card in order to go get vaccinated, because as we're trying to push closer to 70 or 75%, they're trying to find a way to get more people to get involved. So what is our thoughts about the vaccination cards as a form of ID and a form of being able to be accepted even in society? Because a lot of folks want to know, have you been vaccinated or not? And I'm of the opinion that some people might even be straight out lying, saying that they have been or not been, because unless you're going to grab their arm and try to figure out where they've been punched at, you don't know or not know.
CNN actually had a great headline. I'm sorry, I'll let you go, Steve. CNN had a great headline the other day where they said AMC is now allowing vaccinated people and liars to watch movies without masks. And we have to remember, in the States, Sasha, do you have the CDC in Canada? No, it's a United States organization. Those little cards are not recognized internationally.
But we have our own cards. We have vaccination cards.
But at the border, they could refuse to recognize our CDC cards as a form of vaccination.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, the elephant, we're going to come back to this topic, but one of the things Sasha Starr has challenged me to do is to bring up some controversial things, to have some fun. I call it dessert topic. We're going to start doing that more. Have our dessert topic of the day. So I've got two today as the host for the show. One is the name of the new granddaughter, the royal, of Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. And I know, guys, why are we talking about this? But this is fun stuff. Lilibet Diana. Now, folks, Lilibet was the nickname for Queen Elizabeth that her father gave her, and Prince Philip only pretty much called her Lilibet, which was her nickname. Diana, obviously, Prince Harry's mother. Now, you guys tell me, I don't see that distancing themselves from the foreign family, royal family, and I hope it has the Queen's permission. Sasha Starr, what are your thoughts? Or do you care?
That's exactly a good one. You know what? I'm not impressed at all with this couple for whatever they are and what they're doing, and care even less about the name of their daughter. I'm done.
Okay. Well, I just think it's interesting that they want to distance themselves from the royal family, and then the first thing they do is they name it after the queen. But that is his grandmother, and apparently they are close. Any thoughts, Mark and Brandon, before I go to the next dessert topic?
No, I'm waiting for the next dessert topic because I could care less about their names. As long as they come up with good names and all of that, I could care less as to what the names are.
The next dessert topic is that the former president, Donald J. Trump, visited Greenville, North Carolina, and addressed the GOP convention in North Carolina. It is clear that he's going to be involved in the 2022 elections, although Facebook has banned him for 2 years, and it's but also his daughter is not running for the U.S. Senate in Florida, so he's just ignored it. But what, I'll start with you, Brandon. What are your thoughts about Trump's emergence now, saying he's going to be relevant? Is he relevant only to the extent we make him relevant, or do you think he's got a shot here?
Well, I mean, listen, I'd say just as much as there are neo-Nazis today who salute old photographs of Hitler, we'll always have people around who support Trump. I mean, he was the white supremacist of our time. As far as his value, I think he's never had any. But in this current climate, we have to remember when it comes to Facebook. Facebook about a little less than a year ago instituted what they call their Supreme Court, an external body to judge content decisions. It's been big news in the tech world, and they were recently positioned to be asked whether or not President Trump should be reinstated on different social media platforms. They pretty much kicked it back to Facebook and pushed it 6 months down the road because they didn't want to decide. We also have to remember that his blog, From the Desk of Donald J. Trump.com, he shut down himself for lack of audience, for lack of viewers. Nobody was going to the website. Is he going to have a big part to play in politics in the future? Yes. He has a devout following that has infiltrated the Republican Party beyond what the Tea Party could ever do. There are still people in Congress who believe crackpot theories and will devote their lives to him as their personal Jesus Christ and Savior. So clearly there still is an audience there, a voting audience that is interested in what the echo chamber of Donald Trump comes up with. As far as his personal appeal in this situation, first of all, I'm thrilled he got the right Greenville, because I found out during a bad Tinder date one time that there's a Greenville in both North and South Carolina, and I went to the wrong Greenville. But yeah, I mean, I think just his appearance, he doesn't have to say anything. Just him being at a place will give it weight to the QAnon terrorists who try to overthrow the government.
Now, Sasha, I know Sasha doesn't like to even waste a breath on Donald Trump, but what are your thoughts from a Canadian perspective? Do you just think it's foolish for him to try to come back, and that it's just, what are your thoughts about this?
The tragedy is that this is a big problem for American people, that the Trump himself, actually, he is now probably less than nothing, really. But his name, it's still a big draw. I agree with you, Brandon. And for many reasons, actually. Number one is a fundraising. The Republicans still believe that nobody is better at fundraising as Donald Trump. Nobody is just like him. So with him, they solve at least this problem. The funds will be raised as much as possible, and that issue is closed. Number two, I still believe that the biggest draw, all his base, so-called, and so on, these are basically racist people who found legitimate name for their party, because as long as Trump is there, it's not really a Republican party, it's a party of Trump. And in fact, I've read a book by this famous reporter, I forgot his name. He interviewed Trump several times, and one of the interviews was Gerald Kushner. And Woodward, I think Bob Woodward. And Jared Kushner admitted to him, and the interview was taped, so nobody can deny that it really happened. And he said that Donald Trump completed takeover of Republican Party.
Yeah,
that was said, and it was on tape.
I think the problem is that the political system today is become a party of loyalty, particularly on the Republican side. So what's happened is that he does have a base, but I believe, based on what I'm hearing, I have Republican friends, and I must tell you that some of them are, not as they're more moderate Republicans. So they're more low tax Republicans, but they're not so much drinking the Kool-Aid of this right-wing extremism. So I believe that what might happen is that it might be good for the Democrats if Trump wins and gets, it might be bad for the 2022 elections, because I think the strategy there is to retain or grow seats in the Senate and the Congress. But in terms of 2024, I think it could be very hard for him to win a general election. But because what Brandon said, we have the Electoral College. That's what puts everything in play, right, Brandon? If we didn't have an Electoral College, it wouldn't be so easy for Trump.
Well, I'm on here Mark's thoughts a little bit on this too. You say Republican friends, and here's why I say that's an oxymoron.
Republican colleagues.
Even so, I always joke, and this is more of a joke, so don't listen. I know you got my website. I don't want the tweets. I get tweets from this show, but I don't want the tweets. I would say that here's kind of how my thought on the stance of the Republican Party. Regardless of who is in charge of it at this point, when I was in college, I went to house parties. You go to a frat, you go to a house party. If you walk into that party and there are a bunch of Nazis there, a bunch of legitimate neo-Nazis there, you're at the wrong party. I don't care if the people who own the house who are throwing the party are the nicest people in the world. That's not the party I want to be in, so I'm out. And so I think once the mainstream Republican Party started to accept extremists and white supremacists and domestic terrorists openly into their party without fear of retribution, for me, that's the house party rule. If I walk into a house party and there's a bunch of Nazis there, I'm at the wrong place. Oh, yeah. So when it comes to Republican colleagues or friends, my theory is we have the Republicans who fall on the kind of the Bush spectrum, I call it, the Chamber of Commerce, fiscal responsibility Republicans, the pre-Tea Party Republicans. And I don't mind folks who have Republican leanings. I don't mind being friends or colleagues with them. But if I walk into their house and their house is open to the idea of the modern Republican Party, if there are Nazis there, I'm out. So I guess my question for Mark is what do you, obviously you have an interesting perspective on this, a different perspective than me. So looking at the future of the Republican Party, we as of now have been told that Joe Biden won't run again. President Joe Biden won't run again for a second term. Are you in fear of another Trump lookalike or someone maybe who's more charismatic than Trump coming into the next election? What do you think?
I'm definitely very scary about that. That's actually one of the things that I'm very much worried about, worried that could happen and that it could be a dangerous kind of situation. So yes, I'm definitely very worried about a charismatic type of person like that. He's not the first one. I was not a big fan of Reagan. I was not overly a big fan of Nixon. There might have been some others that might be what Steve is talking about that are moderate Republicans, including some that we've had here in this area. I've heard people even wondering about Mr. Manchin over there in West Virginia and all of that. So definitely very interested to see what folks have got to say in that regards.
I think Manchin could potentially be as a vice presidential candidate, possibly, or maybe an agency head. I think it may be hard from such a small state like West Virginia to run for the presidency. I think it'd be very hard for him to win the nomination of the Democratic Party because you're going to need the progressive wing. And definitely, Joe Manchin will not have that support. But in terms of the Republicans, I think it's interesting. Vice President Pence, I think, looks like he, maybe still interested in this case, he may run against Trump. Former UN ambassador and governor of South Carolina, Nikki Haley, his name has come up. And of course, Liz Cheney and the other gentleman, I can't remember his name. He's the congressman that has parted with Trump. I don't know if you guys remember his name. I'm blanking out. But I think there will be other candidates that are going to seek the presidency on the Republican side. And of course, the Democratic side, Joe Biden says he's running again, but I think we have to monitor that, with...
let's be clear. On the Republican side, it's a mess right now because there has been no clear leader that has stepped forward, and we don't know that Trump will run again. every Republican governor. I mean, Ron DeSantis here in Florida is making moves to hit the national stage. There are lots of folks who I think are scrambling to try and fill that seat and that void. And I think in the Republican Party, the closer they can align themselves with the Trumpist policies of the last 4 years, the better shot that they think they'll have within their base. So I do think we'll see a lot of Republican challengers in the next presidential election, and especially the primaries. I'm not sure what the Democratic platform will look like, because there will be some challengers, but I think that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are trying really hard to kind of organize and set up a tee-off as opposed to a re-election campaign. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens here in the States in the next 4 years. I'm planning on proposing to Sasha and moving to Canada. We're going to start a maple syrup farm, and I won't have to worry about American politics anymore.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of Vice President Harris, he has sent her to Guatemala and Mexico. The Vice President is on to Guatemala and Mexico, while Joe Biden and President Joe Biden are on to the United Kingdom. So Vice President Harris, I think, is feeling, the joke is the vice presidency used to be where you did funerals and you traveled all around the world. But, he's pushing her to stuff that he doesn't really want to deal with right now. I don't know how Kamala feels about that, right?
Yeah, I think Kamala's getting some very difficult jobs. There's no doubt about that. She's getting some real hard jobs. But then again, I didn't know that Sasha was being proposed to by Brandon. So that's something else that we just learned recently and everything. So she definitely
Mark, you missed my travel show episode about fleeing the United States before the election when I proposed to Sasha on World Edition. I did a whole episode, and he was part of my promo for that. So.
But what's interesting, folks, is that before we get on to some other issues today, at the end of the day, what's interesting is that these conservative ideologies in America aren't going away. And, at the end of the day, if they keep winning legislatures and they keep winning congressional seats, the Senate seats, in my opinion, that's not a good thing for America. But if you look, let's look at where Sasha sits in Canada. Prime Minister Trudeau is going to be facing a challenger. His approval ratings seem to be down. He ran on a little bit more of a liberal platform, not doing so well. Same thing can be said for Macron in France. Running against a real hardliner. And so nationalism and conservative political ideologies are being felt all around the world, right, Sasha? Is it being felt in Canada as well?
That's correct. That's correct. Absolutely. You see, you have a phenomenon when you and you're trying to push one agenda into one side, it goes all the way, it reaches its maximum point, and then there is a backlash and it goes absolutely in opposite way. And that's what's happened in politics, I guess. For example, even if you take, if you see in Canada, we don't have all these issues like Black Lives Matter or so on, because in Canada, the policy for many years or even dozens of years is the policy of culturalism. Now, this, I think it's also flawed theory, but I don't know, practically it works because there is no dominant culture. And of course, there's probably still majority probably of white people. I'm not even so sure about that. There's also division on Anglo and Francophone lines, and there are a lot of troubles in Canada as well. However, about the Anglophone and Francophone issue, at least Francophones are locked into Quebec. And outside of Quebec, French is very little used. Maybe in New Brunswick, some areas, maybe some areas in Manitoba, perhaps. I'm not even so sure about that. So the outside of Quebec, English is predominantly spoken language. So at least there's not much controversy on that. Okay. Therefore, there's kind of a balance really on many of these controversial issues.
In our last few minutes, tomorrow we're going to be talking about the G7 summit, President Biden's very extensive agenda. It's going to be a good show tomorrow because we're going to dive in and talk about rebuilding alliances. We're going to talk about Russia. We're going to talk about climate change. We're going to talk about the pandemic globally. The president has now talked about 80 million doses. In my city newsletter, it said 25 million on AP News, but this morning it said 80 million because there's over 4 million cases globally. So as we emerge from the pandemic, many other parts of the world, and until it goes away in other parts of the world, this thing's going to be here for a while. That's because of the mutations, right? And we're going to talk about the Supreme Court this week. Very busy month. Big cases from abortion to Obamacare to gay rights, voting rights. Many, many landmark decisions now in the High Court. And rumors that Justice Stephen Breyer is being asked to retire, which would give the president a chance. There have been some rumors about an Asian American being elected to this named the Supreme Court. One name that surfaced is Sri Srinivasan, an Indian American Court of Appeals judge. I think he may be one of the few in the United States. So that would be very interesting. But real quickly, I'm going to go one by one for a quick quiz. And what is something that we haven't talked about today, an unreported story that you think we should be talking about? Anything.
If I can go there, one of the things that I've heard about is that there's been we're talking about definitely the ways that we're recovering, but a number of other countries are not recovering all that great. I was actually on Clubhouse yesterday and heard about what's going on in India, but also Brazil and a number of other places as well. So definitely the underreporting of some of the things that are going on in other parts of the country, we can explore that. Because like I said, I had the pleasure yesterday morning, late night, of talking to a young lady from Brazil who is now living in Norway. And part of the reason she moved to Norway, well, part of it was kind of like for Brandon's idea. She ran away for a man love and all of that, but unfortunately it didn't work out. So she told me that it didn't work out. She got the kid in the process and has a new Norwegian boyfriend, but it didn't work out the way she wanted it to. But now she's in Norway and thinking about coming back to this area, but she hasn't yet. Or coming back to the Americas. But definitely, a lot of our countries, other countries have not done that well with what's going on. India being one, but also Brazil being another.
Yes, it's just terrible that the number of deaths, about 350,000 deaths. Crazy. Brandon, I got one. I got one. I think we don't talk enough about what's going on in Venezuela, what's going on in the Southern Hemisphere. I don't see a foreign policy for the United States that's talking about what we do. And more and more of these people are fleeing these countries to come to the United States because they're being tortured, they're being persecuted, they're being run by dictatorships that are just awful. And I don't hear anything. So I think that's an unreported story, and I hope that we can put our finger on that part of the world. Brandon, anything that comes to mind?
Well, I think Latin America, like you said, is always underreported, and I think it's because the United States has had a fair amount of covert operations and coups. We've supported dictators, and we've created the current environment that exists in Latin American countries, and a lot of Latin American countries. We've funded it sometimes from the ground up. We've installed some of these governmental programs and leaders from the ground up. So I think, Latin America definitely needs some more reporting. Of course, it's Pride Month this month, so I think that there's some great LGBT issues that we could talk about that need a little bit more reporting, a little bit more to talk about. Always underreported, but heavily marketed to nowadays, it seems. So I think that's definitely an underreported issue. And I think the importance of digital media and technology is an underreported issue. We talk a lot about tech companies and monopolies being broken up, but we're not talking about the current mergers and various corporate shenanigans we see happening in the entertainment space. Not reported a lot. So I think that could be a good episode as well. So those are all things I'd like to see more of.
Yeah, we're going to talk. I was going to close out with some LGBT today on my last look, but we're going to be talking about every week, at least dedicate something about LGBT because it is Pride Month. And we're keeping up, as of now, the Olympics is on, but we're keeping our pulse on that. Sasha, anything that comes to mind before we close out today?
I think I wouldn't mind to have more attention to sport events around the globe, such as tennis tournaments, soccer tournament is coming up. It's a European championship, which is almost as good, or maybe some people believe even better than a world championship. Because in a world championship, you have, okay, of course, you have Argentina and Brazil, but then you have a bunch of really weak teams, and they're getting there simply because of geographical considerations. Now, strongest teams of the world beside Argentina and Brazil, they're obviously all in Europe. So the European, it's ultimate championship where you see a lot of high quality games, and all the stars except Messi, unfortunately, who is Argentinian. And I'm really looking forward to the tournament. The French Open is in its second week right now. So
Yes, I'm looking forward. Yeah, well, that's a great idea to talk more about sports, and I guess I'm gonna go ahead and start the wrap up, Mark, if that's okay. But real quickly, it is Pride Month, and we want to thank the LGBT community for their contributions to our country. We stand by you and want to make sure that we address racial or any targeting towards LGBTQ. But we look back to the AIDS pandemic and the kinds of things that happened in the 1980s, and hard to believe that it took 6 years for President Reagan to talk about AIDS, although the first case diagnosed in 1981. I was in college in the early 90s, and I can remember the conversations about the homosexual community was much more negative. I think there's a long way to go. In North Carolina, we had HB2, Mark, which was the bill that said you could go to the bathroom of your choice, passed by the city of Charlotte. That was struck down. Eventually got Governor Pat McCrory voted out of office, who is coming back now to vie for the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate in North Carolina. And I guess I'll close out with tennis. We talked about Naomi Osaka, and looks like she is going to be taking a break. But we hope that we do bring someone back to talk about mental illness on the pro tour. I'll end with just some things to think about. I'd love to bring this topic up and just something to think about. But next week, if all goes well, Rafael Nadal will be playing to win his 14th French Open title, and will break the all-time record from Roger Federer, who pulled out this week to rest his knee from Wimbledon. Now, the debate will be at dinner tables and coffee tables around the world, particularly for us tennis. Who is the greatest of all time? And I had a debate this weekend that even if Rafa wins, I don't know whether you can call him the greatest player of all time, because it's hard to compare players from all generations. However, of the 21 majors, he's won 14 with one championship. Whereas if you look at Federer, he's won 7 Wimbledons, 5 U.S. Opens, a number of Australians, and only 1 French. Same thing with Novak Djokovic. So I guess if they're going to claim the greatest, do they just have to win more majors, or do we call each the greatest generation in their own way?
I think what's important to have in mind is not just number of titles, a level of domination of one person against all others. That happened actually in 1970 to 72. There are 3 years of domination in chess by Robert Fischer. Robert Fischer was not only the best player in the world at these 3 years only, because in 72 he retired essentially after having world championship, but he dominated and he was winning with such margins that never seen before or after that. So Federer, before appearance of Nadal and later Djokovic, Federer dominated everything to such a degree that it's never happened in tennis before. Not only that, his level of play and his style was so highly artistic. It was such a pleasure. I remember him 15 years ago when he was playing. Even now, sometimes you can see that style appearing sometimes from time to time. It was nothing. Whenever you see Nadal, it's a pure concentration, it's a power, it's a training, he's taking every ball so seriously. I don't see much art in what Nadal is doing. Well, he's a great player by all means, but whatever Federer did in his best matches, in his best years, I think it's untouchable still.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting to see. Anyway, just food for thought. An interesting topic. Mark Lee, final thought.
No, definitely. I'm also been concentrating on the basketball as well. We've got a whole basketball tournament going on. And, I'm rooting for the Philadelphia 76ers because my schoolmate Doc Rivers is actually their coach, but they took an L in the first game, and that was a home game. So they've already put themselves behind. So hopefully they can bounce back. And I'm also following the Hurricanes, which is our hockey team here as well. And they are in a serious hole, an even worse hole, because they're down 3-1. And I think that they play on it Tuesday. And we've also seen how sports can be dangerous, because I did see that one of our Durham Bulls players did get hit in the head by a baseball ball last week. And I think he was trying to catch a line drive. But last time I checked, he was still in the stable conditions, even though some of my friends that even are in this network, like Jacoby that does the Gamers Den, have told me that they don't think that he'll ever be playing baseball again. So it does look like he's out of the game and will probably not want to come back to the game. So our sympathies do go out for him, since I know a lot of times people, that's like their life goal and everything. But sometimes these kind of hard knock luck things happen and all of that. So definitely our sympathies do go out to him and all of that. But I've just been following some of the sports news as well. So I've been on this sports inclination. And of course, I'm helping my good friend Eric Kelly run a business expo as well. So that's some of the things that are going on in my life. But definitely looking forward to being back here with you again on it tomorrow, where we'll discuss a lot more of great news as well.
Thank you so much, Brandon Scott. It's been an honor to have you on, as always. Sasha Starr, thank you. Everybody, we'll be back tomorrow for an edition. We're going to be talking about the G7 Summit and a number of other issues. This is Steve Rao signing off. We'll be back tomorrow, June 8th. We want to thank the greatest generation, although due day was yesterday, World War II. We will never forget you. We will always remember you. And let's always remember the sacrifices that those brave soldiers made.
Please let me add something very quickly. If my proposal is $1,000, which I mentioned before, payments, I think that's going to drive all people to Canada from the United States.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Fantastic. Well, listen, we have to go now. Thank you all so much. And we'll be back next week for another edition. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Sounds great.
Mark, are we live? Did you stop it?
Hold on. I have not stopped it yet. I'm still trying to get the thing on.